is a geologist, has a Master of Anthropology, worked for 5 years in Timor-Leste as a Reuters correspondent, and is now about to recommence a PhD looking at issues, comparing issues, I'm guessing, in West Papua and Timor-Leste. So over to you, Julian.
Thank you, Cami. I might just turn that light on. It's all right. And will that go into a full screen? Yeah. How do we do for that? Thanks, Cami. Good on you. Yeah, I'd like to, as Professor Simon mentioned earlier, pay my respects to the Indigenous people of Australia. They've undergone a very similar path of genocide as is happening in West Papua. Their culture's been largely decimated, many languages have been lost, and of course many lives have been lost during the frontier wars as they've been known and called now. West Papua, as has been described by Cami and Jim and Peter King, our dear friend that's passed away, John Wing at CPAX have written some brilliant papers describing the atrocities in West Papua, as has the Yale University. And so I'll be looking today at the history of that, what I believe are the influences, the geopolitical influences that have caused this, and perhaps looking at paths that this issue can be addressed. As Rex and Jacob have mentioned today, they've been looking at paths with the United Nations and the various Pacific forums. There are other paths, I believe, and in this context, I must thank my dear friend Andrew and colleague, Andrew Johnson, who initiated my thoughts into this a couple of years ago, helping him to review what he's been researching. I love this photo because it just shows us where the island of Papua is, or New Guinea, as it's been called in previous times by early Spanish explorers. It is closer to the Australian mainland than we are to Canberra. It's a very, very short distance, and I haven't done it, but I believe if we go to the northern island of Daru in the Torres Strait, we can actually wade across to the island of Papua at low tide. So we never see this. I was getting a coffee this morning, and the news was on with Australia, and you wouldn't believe it, but they had Tasmania, of course, but the map was cut off, truncated at the tip of Australia. So we rarely ever see just how close it is, and how it is our closest neighbour. Now, as it's called, Melanesia, we know that the island of Papua, the predominantly Melanesian people, they are what I call, or anthropologists call, First Nation people. The first people to settle in the environment, and as such, as First Nation peoples tend to do, they live within the confines of the environment. They live in such a way that they don't destroy nature. They respect nature, they worship their ancestors, and they've lived that way for thousands of generations. Unlike globalization today, Western culture today, where we see a resource as an infinite resource that can be chopped down, sold and exploited, Melanesian culture has I would say, almost the opposite value. Things are used only as necessary, and the paradigm of life, from my experience, I've been very fortunate as a young lad to travel through Vanuatu, Solomons, Papua New Guinea, and lived in remote villages, and it really had a big impact on my life. I came home realising that there's an alternative to the capitalist paradigm. Anyone who's been fortunate to live amongst Melanesian people will realise that they have a very strong system of giving, of gift giving. And people become preeminent, they become leaders, they become people of status by how much they can give, by how much generosity they have, how much skills for hunting, skills for medicine, altruistic skills, as opposed to the capitalist paradigm of collecting money and resources and basically getting rich. I have to move through this because I've got a lot of slides. The history, looking at the early contacts between Australia, or the Allies, this is a fairly unknown group called the Oak Tree Party. They were instrumental in World War II in assisting Australia defend Australia. They were our closest allies, our closest neighbours. And we know that it wasn't just in West Papua, it was in Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, East Timor. These people fought and died alongside Australia to preserve our country. In 1944, US troops arrived in Hollandia. Apparently some 500,000 troops went through Hollandia during this period. So it was America's main base in the Pacific to drive out the Japanese. Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels, as we know, carried our troops wounded out in the jungle, took our supplies in. This is the United Nations Resolution 448. It's the development of self-government in non-self-governing territories. And it's a communication of 1950, and it notes that the Netherlands will no longer report on West New Guinea pursuant to Article 73E, a very important article of the United Nations, which we'll see, following the full independence of Indonesia. But they still reported on West New Guinea. That's the important aspect. As I said, Article 73E, it is specifically for non-self-governing territories, that is colonies, who are being administered by, in this case, the Netherlands. They must transmit regularly to the Secretary-General on the progress they are making on the economic, social and educational conditions. And they did. The Dutch were very good at following the international law of the Charter and these resolutions. I'm going to follow a timeline to try to keep track of how these things transgressed. We will have to jump back a little bit as we go through. In 1959, this is a secret dispatch that is now available online. It's as documents become released by America and Australia and the Dutch, were able to get access to these documents and see what they were doing and discussing and planning back in the 50s and the 60s. And this particular document shows us that the Americans had decided to change their foreign policy. They decided that it was time to intervene and to transfer West New Guinea from the Netherlands to Indonesia. So this is hard evidence that it was an American plan 2 years at least before the Act of Free Choice, or rather, sorry, the New York Agreement, Agreement number 6311, that the Americans were actively intervening in the evolution, the independence or the self-determination of the West Papua people. A second dispatch on the same day, in fact, the same day, May 26, 1959, dispatch number 905, and this details plans to create a special United Nations trusteeship over the territory. That's the important word, a trusteeship, followed by the transfer of sovereignty to Indonesia.
Actually, I might just interject quickly. When you say United Nations trusteeship, by definition that means under the UN Charter that they're talking about creating an agreement such like the New York Agreement. It has to be signed by the Netherlands. It has to say who the new administrator is going to be, and and it has to ask the General Assembly to approve it, because the General Assembly is going to be the new trustee person responsible.
So as we can see here, what a trusteeship is. It's under Chapter 12, the International Trusteeship System, and the basic objectives are to promote the political advancement of the inhabitants of the trust territories. So it's the political advancement, not just the health and civil society and well-being, but the political advancement towards self-government or independence. There's no alternative. There's no opportunity to transfer colonies from one country to another. Another very important part of this story is Resolution 1514. This was passed in the 14th of December 1960 in the General Assembly, and it states immediate steps shall be taken in trust and non-self-governing territories to transfer all powers to the people in accordance with their freely expressed will. So that's 1960. That is 2 years before the New York Agreement, or Agreement 6311 as it's called. Back to the US, another secret dispatch. This is now dated the 3rd of March 1961. And I won't go through it because we don't have time, but if you can see the very bottom paragraph, it's discussing Indonesia. And they say, now, although they have not gone so far as to be willing to call the trusteeship a trusteeship, they talk in terms of 1 or 2 years. So Indonesia knows full well what a trusteeship is, a trusteeship agreement. And the last thing it wants is to have that word on this document, on Agreement 6311. Just to break up the text, these are the players involved, the global elites, as I call them, the people who are, I advocate, manipulating America's foreign policy. I haven't got time to go into details, we've only got 20 minutes. Cammy, if you could give me a warning at 10 and 20, that'd be great, so I can try and keep it within the time frame. Here's Kennedy with President Sukarno. As we know, Sukarno was courting the Russians, trying to use that as leverage to take over West Papua. Kennedy, I believe, was being pressured on the one hand by Sukarno and on the other hand by the global elite, the owners of the biggest mining companies and oil companies in the world. Now, back to West New Guinea, 1961, the inauguration of the New Guinea Council with the Netherlands representatives in Hollandia. The Dutch were doing the right thing. They were following Resolution 1514, taking immediate steps, and they formed, through a ballot process, I believe, although I'm not an expert in this particular area, they created the New Guinea Council. Now, the New Guinea Council wrote its manifesto, and part of that manifesto was to call themselves West Papua, or Papua Barat, to name their flag and hoist their flag along the Netherlands flag, to call their people the Papuan people, and it was well and truly on the steps towards independence, very, very close, you would say. And following that, on the 1st of December 1961, as we know, the West Papuan flag rose alongside the Netherlands flag right across the territory. And this is a photo from Manokwari. Then it was reported around the world. This is a report from Associated Press through the New York Times on the 1st of December. Now, 24th of January, following the timeline of documents and information that we've dragged up, this is an Australian cable, a confidential Australian cable, detailing communications between the Netherlands Foreign Minister, in this case Mr. Luns, and the Australian Foreign Minister, or the Minister for External Affairs as they were called at the time, who was Sir Garfield Barwick. And if we can just go through it, the ambassador approached me as I was about to sit down for lunch to ask whether we had taken steps to express to the Americans our disapproval of a trusteeship proposal. So it's well and truly being discussed between the Americans, the Dutch know about it, and the Australians know about it. And Sir Garfield Barwick was not just the foreign minister, but he was also the minister, the Attorney General, I should say, the highest order of Australia when it comes to legalities. This is off Wikipedia, and as we can see, not only was he the senior minister in the Menzies Liberal government at the time in 1962, but he also went on to become a judge on the International Court of Justice within the United Nations, the highest court of the world. So evidence that it wasn't just people talking behind the scenes. This information was known throughout the top level of Western governments and indeed the International Court of Justice. The document itself, agreement number 6311, noting that it transfers administration only from the non-self-governing territory to the United Nations, so therefore it creates a trusteeship agreement. And West New Guinea moves from being a non-self-governing territory to a trust territory. That then brings into play the fact that the administrating authority, in this case the United Nations, has to transmit to the Secretary-General, to the United Nations, yearly on the progress towards the political development towards self-determination or independence. Article 18 deals with the Act of Free Choice. I won't go into that in any detail. We all know the horrific situation that occurred. 1750, this is Resolution 1752. Just going back, I should mention that, where was it? The New York Agreement, 6311, was signed on the 15th of August, 62. But it wasn't brought into the UN until the 21st of September on a Friday afternoon. Many countries tried to object, tried to speak out, tried to delay so it could be argued and discussed. However, it was forced through. However, it was noted, takes note of the agreement. The West Papuan people, of course, had experienced the Indonesians on the 1st of May 1963, and they were extremely brutal, as we will see in forthcoming slides detailing some of their atrocities. So in 1965, the West Papuan troops that were in the Indonesian military, I presume just a small number of them, defected, went to the jungle with 14,000 militia. Bows and arrows would have been main weapons, no doubt, and they attacked the police post in Kibar. The OPM raised the Morning Star flag, and a declaration of independence was made on the 26th of July 1965, according to our dear late friend Dr. John Otto Wondawame in his PhD thesis. Meanwhile, leadership changed in the States, and it also changed in Indonesia. Kennedy was assassinated, and American backers put Suharto in power, someone sympathetic to American interests. As we know, the act of self-determination occurred in 1969. However, 2 years before that, Suharto gave a mining concession to the Freeport Corporation, dominantly owned by the Rockefellers. And in 1968, there's a report here showing that Freeport is flying in its camps into the Grasberg gold deposit in 1968, 1 year before the West Papuan people had the chance to determine their future. 10. Report all over the world. Foreign journalists expelled, thousands of West Papuans killed in battles, 2,000 jailed for urging self-government, and Indonesia appoints the community representatives. So an absolute farce. Another secret telegram, A278 by Frank Galbraith. And if I have time, I'll elaborate on Galbraith, because he was also, not this particular Galbraith, but one of the Galbraith family, was the Minister for Everything in East Timor that orchestrated the government in East Timor. This dispatch, this secret state report, just to give some examples, it's a 7-page report, but a couple of paragraphs will highlight the issues. Regarding the magnitude of the opposition to Indonesian rule, probably a decided majority of the Guyanese people, possibly 85 to 90%, are in sympathy with the Free Papua cause, or at least intensely dislike Indonesians. 85 to 90%. So the US knew full well that the overwhelming majority of West Papuan people were opposed. Retail shops in Manokwari are, with few exceptions, military-owned or operated. The Army also has an adverse effect on certain other areas where merchants are not allowed to operate unless licensed. And perhaps the most oft-cited grievance of the Guyanese people is that the Indonesians cleaned out the shops and storehouses in the period immediately following their takeover of West Irian administration in 1963. Missionaries reported that they had witnessed Indonesian military personnel loading up Air Force planes at night with goods taken from local merchants. Within 2 months of Indonesian takeover, on May the 1st, 1963, there was an acute shortage of food. So they were just raping and plundering the country. And this is recorded. Another one. I don't have the author, I think it's green. 10th of July 1969, a presidential brief before Nixon's visit. The Act of Free Choice, they state, poses domestic and external political problems for both Indonesia and the Netherlands, some of which would be diminished were the United States to enter the picture. Our role in 62, however, does not make us the guarantor of the agreement's implementation. So they're acknowledging their role in this planned transfer. Resolution 2504, the agreement between the Republic of Indonesia and the Kingdom of the Netherlands. So, 19th of November 69, the resolution takes note of the report of the Secretary-General, but it doesn't, I believe, endorse or accept or acknowledge the transfer. Recalling the trusteeship system to promote the political advancement of the inhabitants of the trust territories towards self-government or independence. So an absolute breach under international law. We know it's a trust territory because we know it's a trusteeship. And just again reiterating Resolution 1514. Some of the legal breaches, the UN failed to follow its own charter. Article 73 was ignored, Resolution 15, Part 5 was ignored, a sham referendum, which Ted, of course, was an eyewitness and can probably elaborate on. The annual reporting of political advancement was ignored. The Secretary-General did not engage the Trusteeship Council, which was a key requirement under Article 85 of the Charter, international law, and failure by members to uphold the Charter, because when the United Nations became the administrating authority in 1962, Australia, as a member of the United Nations, was therefore also responsible for the United Nations to carry out its job. And if it's aware that the United Nations is breaking the law, which it does through those secret cables that we now have access to, it is not upholding the law. It is complicit with a breach of international law. So what are the legal avenues for redress? Well, Andrew has been pushing me for ages to help him look at this issue, and I have. And it's really quite clear when you start looking at the Charter. It's not rocket science. And under the rules of procedure of the Trusteeship Council, Rule 7E states, this is for the provisional agenda shall include consideration of E, all items proposed by any member of the United Nations. Now, the Trusteeship Council is the body of the UN which looks over trusteeship territories, in this case, Western New Guinea. They're the ones that make the petition that goes to the administration to answer. How are you going with your work towards independence, towards education, towards health, well-being? That's their role. So, that Trusteeship Council exists. It sits from time to time. There's no actual items on the agenda, but according to Section E, any member of the United Nations can put an item on the agenda. So, that's what we've done. As some of you will know, we've been liaising with the representatives, the ministers from Vanuatu, and they have agreed to add an item to the agenda. It's very simple. The item is lodged with the Secretary-General. The Secretary-General puts it on the agenda of the Trusteeship Council, and next time they meet, they have to consider it. I'll go through it very quickly. Basically, all we're doing is drawing attention to these issues which I've outlined, the breaches, the fact that they didn't follow 1514, they didn't follow Article 73E. 5 minutes, okay. And we draw them to the Article 85. We draw them particularly, now this is an interesting document which we'll get to. One of the documents which is available is, it's not a, what would you say, a legal document of the United Nations. It's a summary sheet attached to the documents of the United Nations Temporary Executive Authority in West Irian. So there's boxes and boxes of documents which we can access, and this is like a cover sheet which tells you the list of documents in that box or in that archive. And as you can see, under administrative history, it says in 1963, Dutch New Guinea became Irian Barat, which in 1973 changed its name to Irian Jaya and is currently administered by Indonesia. So this is a document made sometime after 73 or during 73, and it's stating quite categorically that Irian Jaya is currently administered by Indonesia. The agenda item finally requests the Trusteeship Council, in accordance with Article 85, Part 2 of the Charter, and General Assembly Resolution 171, asks the International Court of Justice for an advisory opinion on the issues raised in that item. And Resolutions 171 states that the United Nations should make greater use of the International Court of Justice. It's there to assist when you have difficulty in interpreting the Charter and international law. If you have any issues, put a question to them. They're sitting there waiting to help you. So that's all we're asking. We're not asking for intervention. We're not asking for troops or anyone to do anything. We think there's an issue that needs to be addressed. Please ask the ICJ to give a legal opinion. And while going through all this, Rule 74, I notice, allows petitions. A petition is a very simple thing to do, and Rule 74 says petitions may be accepted if they concern the operation of the international trusteeship system. You don't need 5 members, you don't need thousands of signatures, anybody can do it. Petitions may be inhabitants of trust territories, or other parties. So anybody can make a petition. We've drafted a petition, and we would like everyone to add their name to it once it's finished. Thirdly, as members of the public, we can hold our governments to account for their complicity in the ongoing genocide. As I mentioned, CPACs, Yale University, Cami and Jim have done great work advocating this issue about the genocide going on. But there's also Article 3, which talks about complicity in genocide, and Article 4, which talks about those who can be punished. And they are rulers, public officials, or private individuals who are complicit. So in this regard, Australia is complicit. We train the Indonesian military. This is a photo of Largo, where I lived in East Timor for some time, another example of atrocities and genocide perpetrated by Indonesia with Western support. This is our Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, saying there's no evidence of genocide in West Papua. What else can she say? She is complicit. She can be taken before the International Criminal Court and charged with complicity in genocide. We talk about what we can do. These are things that we can do as Australians, where our representatives are working to kill our neighbours. I won't go through all of this. You've all read the reports. There's tons and tons of reports coming out every day about atrocities in West Papua. 5,000 arrested last year. Rudy Hernawan has written a brilliant article just recently describing how killing is orchestrated to infuse a message of terror. So they kill the KNPB on purpose to instill a message of terror throughout the people. And it's not just in West Papua. The draconian policies of the Indonesian military are being carried out throughout the archipelago. As a young geologist, I worked in Sumatra, I worked in Borneo, Kalimantan. Here's Jim's work about, as we know, the population being decimated by the transmigration program. The reign of terror extends across the archipelago. The intentional HIV, spread of HIV, as our dear Dr. John Anuame told me many years ago when he was young, the Indonesian military handed out blankets and pigs. They thought that was great until they found out they were infected with tuberculosis. Michael Batchelor has done great reports in the Sydney Morning Herald showing how young Papuan children are taken to Islamic fundamentalist schools put behind bars, indoctrinated into Islam, and then sent back to carry on the process. Another example of genocide under the convention. 1 minute. We trained the troops, as I say. We trained the police, the terrible Detachment 88. The UK sells them weapons. Our own dear Mark Worth was found dead in West Papua, just like our journalists in Balibo and East Timor, which I know now our Signals Directorate knew were happening at the time. They could hear the correspondence between the Indonesian military. So our government is complicit in all of this. Here's the face of young West Papuan people, still determined, still fighting. And from Melinda Janke, I read her report early this morning, and her last paragraph is brilliant. It follows that the international community of states are also under an obligation to ensure that Papuans are allowed to exercise freely their right of self-determination. And in their actions against and resistance to such forces, forcible action in pursuit of their right to self-determination, such peoples are entitled to seek and receive support in accordance with the purposes and principles of the Charter. Thank you.
Wow, what a tour de force. So questions for Julian. We've got 5 minutes or so.
Again, you use the word referendum in connection with the act of free choice. I just can't.
Oh, it's not a referendum.
Well, I said you used the term at one point.
Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have used it.
Yeah, sorry, I just can't.
It may be a referendum under international dialogue, but it wasn't a referendum, as we saw. There was no referendum. They were handpicked. You were there. You saw it. It was probably a threat of murder. From the reports I've read, the people that voted, their families were held by the military while they voted. They could vote no other way.
A couple of other points. Simply in a number of papers, people talk about the United Nations as if it exists, but a different formulation of it would be to see it simply as an instrument of state, in which case you get quite a different understanding of many of these events. I'm not supporting them, get the exact opposite, but if you see it as an instrument of state policies, then a great deal of what's happened in Papua in particular becomes predictable, because that's what certain governments wanted, and it's not driven by principles or by national interest, and it seems to me that that's an important point. The other thing is you talked several times about the Trusteeship Council, and although the chamber is kept empty, my understanding is that it no longer exists.
No, it does exist, and they do meet.
They don't.
They do
That's
meet.
my point.
No, they do meet.
Well, not according to any officials I've talked to in New York.
They do according to the UN records
Well,
every year or two.
There's nothing on their agenda, Ted, but they do meet because they have to change precedent from time to time. They're part of the Charter, and you can't just make them disappear.
yeah, well,
You can look at the records. We can talk about it.
well, you can ask the people I ask.
I think they only define. They're not functions, but they're there.
They're dormant.
Yeah.
They're sitting there.
They're a silent legal phenomenon. That's all.
Yeah.
It's an empty saying.
It's empty because there's nothing on the agenda at the moment.
Yeah, that's my point.
But anybody,
So,
any
if you
member,
look up the public records, right, the trusteeship public records since 1994, they've met over a dozen times, right, probably about 20 odd times, holding meetings, electing a new president and vice president. Every time either the French or UK representative steps down, they have to vote in a new one.
And just finally, another point is we already talked about the behaviour of the military. I'm just wondering if it's useful to make a distinction between the behaviour of the military as an organisation and the behaviour of military officers, because I've certainly seen situations where the military is out of control, but they're not under orders. They're just riding. And it seems to me that that might be quite an important thing to pursue, whether the issue is the indiscipline from military for the issue of borders, because it might give you a very different understanding of not only the issue, but how to address it.
Okay, thank you for those points. I'm just conscious of time. We've got reps and then Ronnie and then we'll have to close it off with questions. Yes.
So, what do you do to deactivate the committee?
Put an item on the agenda.
Because in 2000, because Papua leaders from PDP and OPM, they were the audience with the Reconciliation Committee in New York. And they explained to us how to get the issue back to the United Nations.
But this is not the decolonisation committee. This is the trusteeship council, which administers the questionnaires that go to the administrating authorities to report on the conditions of those trust territories.
Yes, I understand.
Yeah.
But this is what they explained to us. If you want to get the issue back to the United Nations, this is what they have to do. The process is very tomorrow.
Maybe that's one avenue, but this is an easy avenue by getting one member of the UN, doesn't matter who it is, to put an item on the agenda. As indicates Vanuatu has offered to do. So then they have to look at it. And we're not asking for intervention, we're not asking for peacekeeping troops, nothing like that. We're simply asking for them to look at those documents that we've outlined, the failure of following Resolution 1514, taking immediate steps, the failure of not following Article 73E of reporting. We're asking them to take note and ask the ICJ to consider it, which is the job. And it's even in the Charter to utilise the ICJ where there are issues of contention where you're not sure.
Okay, thanks, Om. And one more for Ronnie.
Okay, thank you. It's really good to see that the time now. I'm really interested during your findings in terms of the trusteeship council, the membership, and who are the members, and whether there is, my understanding is the council is made up of the membership, who are those members, and there is a working committee, and who are the committee really assigned to really present this agenda item at the council, which now it's not that active. So that's kind of, whether you have come across that, and is there a committee or a special rapporteur based on the council to reassign?
The current members of the trusteeship council are the 5 permanent security council members. Russia, America, UK, France, China.
Oh, you mean that 5 that have the right to vote?
So,
The 5 that have the veto right?
representative from each of them,
Yeah.
yes.
Do they have a committee?
And the important thing is, trusteeship council meetings are in the open. They're not behind closed doors. The trusteeship council is specifically built as an open
And whoever puts the item on the agenda is entitled to go and sit and also participate.
address it.
So it's a very good avenue to use.
One quick follow-up, was that Ronnie?
Yeah, but I think usually the council is just that, it's a council and there is the leaders from all this world coming.
Yeah.
But there needs to be a committee out, a kind of like a practical working group that really follows whether it's informal or formal cases. As in the Human Rights Council, where it's going to filter down to a committee that really focus on that, a working committee, which is in the case where we push for decolonization, there's a decolonization committee. So in terms of your finding, do you really pin down in terms of that? So practically, we'll have a clear understanding of the target if we wanted to choose that pathway and putting this on the council in the bigger scheme. But we really need to know how to really penetrate through this committee, so then it becomes an agenda item at the trusteeship council.
It becomes, once somebody puts the item to the Secretary General, he must put it on the agenda of the Trusteeship Council. Once it goes to the Trusteeship Council, as you saw in Rule 7, they must consider it. Once they consider it, the obvious thing, we've got to give it to the ICJ.
It's not like the General Assembly, which actually has a vetting process for motions, and motions can get knocked out before they actually get presented. The trusteeship council rules specifically state that any member can put any issue on. If you want to, you can put a nonsense article on there. Right?
So, excuse me. So, in brief, we would like to say that the mechanisms through the trusteeship councils is totally different with the mechanism of the C24, because if a state, let's say Vanuatu, like you said, if it's this coming September, try to put the item or to force into the next year agenda.
No, you haven't got to wait 1 year. You can do it tomorrow. You can do it
Yeah,
next week.
that is what I said. So during the general debate, he can state it out to ask the General Assembly,
You can hand it over
to ask the Secretary General to come to this opinion.
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's different mechanisms, Ronnie. It's not like,
I'm sure there is a committee that it's the institutions.
Nobody
They
understands
have councils. It's just like the World Bank, like the IMF.
so fast.
They have the council, the governance structure, but then they have the directors, but also the working committee. So this is something that I just want to know whether you explore further into that, rather than just the overarching council, but really practically.
All they do, the trusteeship council, is to make formulate the questionnaire to go to the administration authority. In this case, the administrating authority is Indonesia.
So I wonder if we, because it's such an interesting and important conversation, if maybe we can continue that during afternoon tea up there. Thank you to Julian and